Welcome back for growth factors versus growth rates. All right, so we got the growth of the rabbit population one more time here. All right, the yearly growth factor was problem 3.1 was 1.8. All right, and we had the equation p equals 100, the initial value times 1.8 to the n, 1.8 to the n power, and then doesn't make sense to have a fractional part of a rabbit, and hopefully not unless you're having a little stew tonight. What does it say about the reasonableness of the equation? All right, I mean, just when you're estimating, just keep in mind, like if you're estimating for the population, we're using numbers that are obviously whole numbers, and when you're estimating for time, or whatever the numbers are that you're getting for x and y, just make sure you round appropriately. Okay, if you need to round up, round up. If you need to round down, round down. No big deal. Okay. All right, so the growth factor of 1.8 is the ratio of the population for a year divided by the population for the previous year. Okay, so what does that mean in a sense? So is the ratio of the population. Okay, so first off, ratio is a fraction. Okay, so let's bring that back. So it's a fraction of, okay, the population of the year. Okay, that's one thing. Divided by the population of the previous year. Okay, so let's think about that. So population for the year, so we have a ratio, a fraction. Okay, cool. So here's my fraction. Okay, so there's a numerator. This is the numerator, the population for a year divided by the population for the previous year. So pick a year. So here's my pick a year 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm not going to pick anything less. I was going to pick year 2, right? So I'm going to pick 324. So population for the year, so 324. And divided by the population of the previous year. And the previous year was 180. And that's about 1.8. Right, and I showed you guys how to do that with an equation in the last video. I did 180 times x equals 324, divided by 180, divided by 180, and voila, you got the same exact fraction or ratio. All right, so what does that mean? The growth rate is I'm going to try this out here, try a new little technique here, the percent of increase. Oh no, bringing it back to 7th grade. What does all that mean? Percent of increase. All right, so look at that magic. We got a new magic pen that I was playing with today. All right, so the percent of increase. So let's think about last year. Last year we talked about percents and all that good stuff. Oh, let me get rid of that. Last year we talked about the percents of numbers and all that fun stuff. So we had discounts. We had markups. Right, so hopefully you remember this. You could have a 20% markup, meaning whatever item you have, you buy the item, you want to sell it and make some money on it, you mark it up 20%. So you own the item at 100%, you mark it up, so you add 20% to it, and you end up selling it for 120% to make some kind of money, right? The 100% is not, the 120 is not all the profit, right? The 20% is the profit part of it, right? The 100 is how much you paid, right? You had to buy this item, and or you own it fully, 100%. You had to buy or pay for 100% of this item, and then you sold it for 20%. So the profit was the 20%. All right, so that's just a quick little recap from last year. All right, so main thing here is you're always starting at 100%, right? You have 100% of something, and then you're increasing it or you're decreasing it. So this is what's happening in the population. If I have 100% of my population, I'm at 100, right? That's 100% of my initial population. I have all of it. And then I'm deciding to increase this population. Well, if I just take 100, if I just take my initial population of 100 rabbits and I multiply this by 100%, well, how many rabbits will I have? Well, 100%, like if you want to get rid of your decimal, you get rid of your decimal, get rid of your percents, and you move your decimal twice, and you end up multiplying 100 by 1. So that's not going to change, right? You're going to keep that same 100%. So if I multiply by something bigger than 1, so my 100% now is, I end up multiplying by 180. Well, if I go backwards here and I put back my decimal, well, I have 100%, but now I have more than just 100%. How much more do I have than just 100%? And in this case, I have another 80% more than, right? So 100% plus 80% is this total of 180% here. So let's look at that. So sometimes the growth rate is given instead of the growth factor. So sometimes the growth rate is given instead of the growth factor. Okay, and then we're going to compare the two. So in that case here of the growth rate versus the growth factor, right? If I'm increasing, what is the growth rate? Well, if I'm multiplying by 1.8 and I turn this into a percent, and this is 180%, which breaks down into 100%, right? 100% is always what you start with. And then, well, what do I have? I have 180, so there's an extra 80%. So the growth rate is 80%. So what's the growth rate of the rabbits growing? Is an 80% increase year after year. Okay, but I multiply by my growth factor, which is 1.8, not just 0.8. Right? So this is 1 plus 0.8 equals 1.8. Hence, this is the growth factor. And the 80% or the 0.8, this piece is just the growth rate. Okay, so let's take a look at that. So find the growth factor associated with each growth rate. So I'm going to take 100%. They're giving me the rate here. I'm going to add 0% to this, and I'm still at 100%. Turn this percent into a decimal, and I get 1. So my growth factor is just 1. Okay, 15%. I'm going to take 100% that I start with. I'm going to add 15% and get 115%. Take that percent, turn it into a decimal, and I get 1.15. That is my growth factor. All right, let's try a few more. I'm going to take this 30% increase, add this to my 100% that I'm always starting with. This is going to give me 130%. Turn this percent into a decimal, take away the percent sign, and move your decimal over twice, and this gives me 1.3. That's my growth factor. All right, so that's my B term in my equation. So B equals 1.15 or B equals 1.3, depending on whatever these word problems have. All right, but that's the growth factor of this. So let's just finish these off. So you got 75%. Again, I'm going to add. I'm always starting with 100%, and I'm going to increase by 75%. This is going to give me 175%. Once I have my total percentage, then I can turn this into a decimal. And once I turn that into the decimal, then that is my growth factor. 100%, starting with, so I'm going to increase by 100%. I start with 100%. This gives me a total of 200%. So 200% as a decimal is just 2. Well, think about that. Well, if I have 100%, if you have $1 and somebody gives you 100% of what you have and you have $2 now, well, you just doubled, which is why the growth factor is 2. 150%. Well, I'll take that. So plus the 100% you start with gives you 250%, and as a decimal is 2.5, and that is my growth factor. So how do you find the growth factor given the growth rate? You add the growth rate to the growth factor, and then convert to a decimal. If you scroll down a little bit to number 3, it says find the growth rate associated with the growth factor. So this is my b value, so b is equal to 1.5, right? That's my growth factor is what they're giving me. All right, I'm going to always think about that. I'm starting with 100%. So 100% as a decimal is just 1. Well, I'm starting with 1. So how do I get from 1 to 1.5, which is given to me? Well, I'm going to add 0.5. So 0.5 is my growth rate. Turn that into a percent by moving your decimal over 2 times, 1, 2, and really your growth rate is 50%. Okay, next one. 1.25 is made up of 1 plus 0.25. Now notice I'm always starting with 1, so this one again is going to be 1 plus something. This is going to be 1 plus something, right? I'm always starting with 1 because that 1 represents my 100% of what I have, right? So this 1 here is always going to be the 100% that I always start with. Okay, so what am I doing to that 100%? Well, right now it's a growth rate, a growth, right? So growth meaning I'm increasing something. So I'm increasing by 0.25. Well, what's 0.25 as a percent? So my growth rate is 25% or 0.25. I'll take either one. 1.1 equals 1 plus 0.1, right? 1 plus 0.1 is 1.1. So move your decimal over twice, 1, 2, and my growth rate is 10%. D, 1 equals 1 plus, well, how do I get 1? I'm just going to add 0. So my growth rate is 0%. How do you find the growth rate if you know the growth factor? So how do you find the growth rate given growth factors, like example number 3, right? That's what we did. We broke it down. We could take 1, take the growth rate and subtract 1 from it. So for part A, 1.5 minus 1 is equal to 0.5. For B, 1.25 minus 1 is equal to 0.25. For part C, 1.1 minus 1 is equal to 0.1. And for D, 1 minus 1 is equal to 0. So a couple ways. So you could do it 2 different ways. You could look at it both ways there. If you like the subtraction part, that's nice. So 0.5, which is 50%, 0.25, which is 25%, 0.1, which is 10%, and 0, which is 0%. And that's how you find your growth factor given the growth rate. And do you put the growth factor or growth rate into the equation? Good question here, right? Make sure you always put the growth factor into the equation. I don't want to know how much I do not want to know how much you're just increasing by. I need to know both. I want to know the rate of increase plus the 100% that you start with, right? That's the growth factor. Right? That's what's given to you on the table when you see yourself multiplying on the y-axis. When you have your table there and you keep multiplying down, that number is the growth factor, right? And that's what I want to use for my equation. All right, so we're at 13 minutes. I'm going to skip a few slides. So for this homework assignment, or for this assignment, which is the growth factor versus growth rate, I skipped a few pages here. And if you take your packet and just, I got 1, 2, 3. If you go about four or five pages in from where this page is, you come across a worksheet on top that says growth rate and factor. All right, I think this is a really good worksheet to practice with. Again, the answer key is online, so you could definitely take a look at it. But let's just do one or two, not to go too far in past 15 minutes, but growth factor. So the growth factor, again, is going to be the B part, so 1.25, right? The growth rate, okay, so again, we could do 1.25 minus 1, which is equal to 0.25, and that's my growth rate. You can leave it as a decimal or as a y-intercept. And then the initial starting point, and that's my A value of 2. All right, so one more. The growth factor, that's the number inside the parentheses, so 2.1. What the number being raised to the exponent. 2.1 is the growth factor. The growth rate, well, let's take the 2.1, subtract 1 from it, let's subtract 100%, and you get 1.1. So your growth rate, 1.1 or you can move your decimal over twice and say it's 110% rate of increase. And then the last one here was the initial starting point. Well, that's always my A value there, and that's the 10 I start with. All right, so there's a few examples on here which are really good. Given the growth factor, given the growth rate, find the growth factor for numbers 7 through 12, and given the growth factor, find the growth rate. And we'll go one more time. So here's the growth rate. I'm going to take that 15%, add it to 100%, and you get a total of 115%, which turns into 1.15. That's my growth rate. The one for number 13. Find a growth factor given a growth rate. Cool. So we'll take 1.75, subtract 1, and you get 0.75. So the growth rate is 0.75 or 75%. All right, so about 16 minutes in. Hopefully that helps. Work on that page there for a little extra practice, and then ask questions the next time we meet. Thank you very much. See you guys soon.